At 2:17 a.m., deep inside Ukraine's hidden forward airstrips, the night looked deceptively calm. Then, without warning, the silence ripped apart. Long-range drones lifted off like a swarm of angry hornets, their propellers slicing through the darkness. From the banks of the Dnipro Storm Shadow cruise missiles and HIMARS rockets blazed skyward. This wasn't a raid. It was a coordinated campaign designed to tear a hole straight through Russia's forward defenses around Belgorod, the last buffer before Moscow itself. The first wave skimmed barely 100 feet above the treetops, hugging river valleys radar invisible. At the same time, ATAK-MS missiles roared overhead at nearly Mach 3. Their warheads slammed into Russian radar stations on the outskirts of Belgorod. Screens went black. Operators froze. In an instant, Russia's eyes along the frontier had been gouged out. On the ground, armor surged forward. Leopard 2A6 and Challenger 2s barreled across open fields at 40 miles an hour, their 120mm cannons cracking the night with thunder. Every shot was surgical command posts vanished in eruptions of fire ammo. Trucks disintegrated, artillery pits ripped open. Behind them, infantry fighting vehicles spilled squads of soldiers into the breaches. Russia scrambled a counterattack. Columns of T-72s and BMPs rolled out of Belgorod's southern districts, determined to slam the door shut. But the ground had been prepared. Anti-tank mines turned the lead vehicles into burning husks, and as the survivors tried to maneuver, javelins and NLAWs struck with merciless precision. The advance dissolved into chaos. By dawn, the sky above Belgorod was a grey-brown wall of smoke. Fuel depots raged like volcanoes. Rail yards lay twisted and useless. Ukraine had shattered the first gateway into Russia's interior. And even as Belgorod burned, the second act was already unfolding. North, 200 miles closer to Moscow, lay Voronezh, an industrial artery feeding Russia's war machine. Ukrainian Su-27s and MiG-29s thundered through the night at 15,000 feet wings, heavy with JDAMs. The bombs fell free, their GPS kits steering them with ruthless accuracy. Seconds later, massive oil tanks erupted towers of fire 500 feet high, painting the horizon. Shockwaves shattered windows across entire districts. No propaganda could spin this. The world could see Russia's war engine bleeding. But Moscow struck back. From the depths of the Black Sea, a submarine spat Caliber cruise missiles northward at 600 miles an hour. Alarms wailed across Ukrainian positions. Yet Patriot PAC-3 batteries were waiting. Interceptors screamed skyward at over Mach 4, colliding mid-air with the Calibers in blinding fireballs. Fragments rained harmlessly into empty fields. The counterpunch had been caught and crushed. On the ground, the fighting grew even more ruthless. Along the M4 highway, Russia's vital supply lifeline to Moscow convoys of trucks and armored carriers roared north. Then came the sound. At first, a faint buzz. Then a swarm. FPV suicide drones screaming in at 120 miles an hour dove straight into fuel trucks, ammo carriers, and escort vehicles. One by one, they detonated. Explosions rolled down the highway like a chain of dominoes. Flames engulfed the convoys until the M4 itself had become a corridor of wreckage and fire. By morning, Voronezh was unrecognizable. Oil depots burned uncontrollably. Ammunition dumps detonated in chain reactions that shook the city. The M4 highway was a graveyard of blackened steel. Russia's logistical artery had been cut. For Ukraine, the strikes weren't just tactical, they were strategic. Belgorod crippled, Voronezh aflame. Moscow, once distant and untouchable, now stood increasingly isolated. Through the night, Voronezh burned its glow, rising into the heavens. The war's balance had shifted, and the firelight on the horizon told the story Ukraine was no longer just defending. It was breaking Russia's heartland open. Russia, humiliated on its own soil, could not remain silent. The Kremlin demanded a response not from the skies above Moscow, but from the depths of the Black Sea. Beneath the waves, a Russian Kilo-class submarine glided like a predator in the dark, its missile tubes armed with caliber cruise missiles. At exactly 3:42 a.m., the hatches snapped open. One after another, the missiles burst from the sea rocket boosters, igniting in fiery tails as they arced north toward Kyiv. Flying just under the speed of sound, each carried a 1,000-pound warhead designed to rip through command centers, fuel depots, and civilian infrastructure. The Kremlin expected terror. They expected panic. Instead, what they met was steel resolve. Inside, Ukraine radar screens lit up instantly. Patriot PAC-3 batteries were already on high alert, their crews trained for this exact moment. Within seconds, interceptors streaked skyward at Mach 4, leaving blinding white trails against the night. The first intercepts detonated above Kiev fireballs, illuminating the sky as Russian missiles were shredded mid-air, their fragments raining down harmlessly into empty fields. Out of dozens fired, the majority were destroyed. The message to Moscow was undeniable: Ukraine's shield was holding. But Russia wasn't done. From the surface of the Black Sea, Russian frigates loosed P-800 Onyx supersonic missiles. Screaming across the water at nearly 2,700 miles per hour, their sea-skimming trajectory made them harder to track and even harder to stop. Their targets, Ukraine's coastal defenses and naval infrastructure. But Ukraine had prepared for this exact assault. As the Onyx missiles surged inland, the sea itself struck back. From hidden ports and camouflaged bays, Ukraine unleashed its naval drones, low-slung fast attack craft packed with explosives. Skimming just feet above the waves at 50 knots, they weaved through tracer fire as they charged the Russian fleet. Almost simultaneously, Neptune anti-ship missiles thundered from their launchers, homing in on the enemy warships. The Russian formation suddenly found itself trapped, drones rushing from below, missiles diving from above. Chaos erupted. One frigate swerved violently to evade incoming fire, only to collide with another. A Neptune missile slammed into its hull flames, erupting across the deck as sailors scrambled for survival. Then came the naval drones. One rammed into the stern of a Russian corvette and detonated in a towering spray of fire and seawater. The explosion ripped the ship apart, leaving only smoke and twisted wreckage in its place. By dawn, the Black Sea was burning. The Kremlin's retaliation had failed to break Ukraine's defenses, and worse, it had forced Russia to divide its strength across yet another front. The war was no longer just a clash of tanks and aircraft. It had become a battle for dominance on land, in the air, and now across the sea. Every strike Russia launched to reassert control stretched its forces thinner. Every failure only emboldened Ukraine further. and Ukraine was ready to push. As the Russian fleet smoldered on the horizon, the fight shifted back inland. At 4:28 a.m., the first wave of long-range Ukrainian drones slipped across the frontier. Each carried 90 to 100 pounds of explosives, their small engines humming just above the treetops. Flying low at barely 200 feet, the drones hugged river valleys, traced forest outlines, and followed rural roads like shadows. Radar stations scanned the skies, but the drones were ghosts too low, too slow, and too quiet to detect. For hundreds of miles they crept northward, waypoints calculated with surgical precision. But the drones were only one part of the plan. From the skies, Storm Shadow cruise missiles streaked forward at nearly 600 miles per hour. Their targets Russian air bases near Tula, barely 100 miles south of Moscow. Within seconds, hardened shelters cracked open under the impact. Fireballs erupted, consuming runways and fuel depots. More importantly, entire squadrons of Russian fighter jets planes that might have intercepted the incoming waves never left the ground. The night sky told the story clearly. Ukraine was no longer just defending. It was carrying the fight to Russia's doorstep. And for Moscow, the cost was only beginning. Now the question is, how far will this war escalate, and who will control the future of the Black Sea? If you want to see what happens next, don't just watch, be part of this journey. Hit like, share this story, and subscribe for the next chapter. Because the war isn't slowing down, and neither are we.